Thank you, Stephen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. For those that don't know me, my name is Steve Burridge, and I work as an account development manager at Springer Nature. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by Hannah Tippett-Simpson, who works as a research data specialist for Springer Nature. And during today's session, Hannah will give some invaluable insight into the importance of research data. Before we start, though, I just wanted to cover a couple of quick housekeeping points. The session today is being recorded, and tomorrow you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides from today. Also, this webinar is the latest in a series of sessions. Over the course of May and June, we'll be hosting another 6 sessions on a variety of topics, including one on AI and scientific writing, and another where we look at real-world examples of accepted and rejected submissions. All of these sessions are designed to be short, sharp, and full of useful information. I'll share more info about the upcoming webinars towards the end of the session today, and there'll also be information about these in the email you receive tomorrow, so please do keep an eye out for that. One final housekeeping point before we get started. I mentioned before that we've designed these sessions to be short and sharp, so the presentation today will last around 30 minutes. That then leaves plenty of time at the end for Q&A, so if you do have any questions as we go along, simply type them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll come to them at the end of the webinar. Okay, with that, I think we're just about ready to start. So I'd like to formally hand you over to our speaker for today. Hannah Tippett-Simpson joined Springer Nature in 2016 via the data publishing journal Scientific Data. She now works within the research data and content innovation team, supporting initiatives that promote open science and improving research data practices. So Hannah, over to you.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Stephen, for the kind introduction. And thank you all for being here today. This presentation, I will be discussing research data. My goal is sort of to convey its critical role in academic work, showing how it underpins research quality, transparency, and impact. But despite its importance, it's often treated as an afterthought. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're working with the research community to shift the culture and place data where it belongs, sort of at the actual heart of the research process. Next slide, please. Just quickly, though, before we dive into today's topic, I wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the other workshops happening as part of this series. There's a really great lineup covering a real range of themes, and I encourage you to explore the options and register for any sessions that spark your interest or align with your work. Next slide. So this quick agenda. Today, we're looking at the role of research data in the broader research ecosystem. I'm going to start with a definition of what we mean by research data and why it matters. I'm going to explore how it relates to research quality, integrity, and reproducibility, and look at some real-world examples where the absence of data has had some serious consequences. From there, we'll talk a bit about the growing number of data sharing mandates that we are seeing from funders and institutions, and then how at Springer Nature we've responded with our own standardized data policy. I'm going to then walk through some of the tools and support we offer to help make data sharing easier, including repository integrations, automations for data availability statements, and we'll also cover a little bit about how you as a researcher can get recognition for your data by publishing data papers. And then very finally, point you to some practical resources and support channels that you can use after today's session. Okay, next slide, please. Right, so yeah, to get us started, I think it's helpful to define what we actually mean by research data so that we're all speaking the same language. Research data are the data that you generate, that you collect or analyze during your study. They typically represent the core set of measurements, observations, or outputs that will form the basis for your findings and that go on to support the conclusions of your work. So this could include survey responses, laboratory measurements, interview transcripts, images, simulation results, basically any materials that provide evidence for your research claims. I would say generally the only thing that is conclusively not research data would be the research article itself. Next slide. So now that we've defined what research data is, it's worth reflecting on how it fits into the broader research landscape. So traditionally, when we talk about research outputs, the focus has always been almost exclusively on the published article. So the journal paper is treated as the end product. It's the gold standard of academic contribution. It's how you're evaluated, promoted, and funded. Why? Because it fits the traditional academic system. It's peer reviewed, it's citable, there are metrics, it's neatly packaged. But in this traditional model, the data, which could be considered the foundation of the research, is it's often sidelined, undershared, and undervalued, despite being essential for verifying your results and enabling reuse. So it tends to sit in the background if it's visible at all. We also have like data, we have code, we've got protocols, and even null results, and they're all vital components of the research process. So whilst this talk is focusing on data today, all of these elements, they come together to embody the principles of open science, which is bandied around a lot. And I think it's often over philosophized, but it's really just a more transparent, collaborative, rigorous approach to research. Next one. Okay, so a quick illustration of why data matters. This is a very simplified example. Consider that a paper claims that drug X lowers your blood pressure by 10 millimeters of mercury on average. So that sounds compelling on the surface, but without access to the underlying data, we can't fully evaluate the finding. We've got, we're left with important unanswered questions. So for example, how many patients were excluded? Was it 3? Was it 15? In a sample of 50, that difference is pretty big. If you exclude outliers, does that significantly alter the averages and the statistical significance? What did the individual data points look like? Did most patients see a small improvement, or did a few people improve a lot while others saw no change? Without those individual values, it's kind of difficult to tell if the average is actually telling the full story. Maybe there were differences by gender or age. Maybe the drug only worked for say men over 60, but if the paper doesn't report subgroup analysis, either maybe word limits or just a lack of statistical power, we won't know. If you shared those data, then it allows others to look more deeply into the subgroup effect. Anything else? How was blood pressure measured, for example? Was it a one-time measurement? Was it averaged over multiple readings? Was it taken at home or in a clinic? Context that you get from timestamps or measurement conditions could dramatically affect how we actually interpret those results. So without the data, the paper may be accurate, but we can't verify or build upon that. Next slide. So that kind of ugly example shows how the absence of data limits our ability to truly assess or trust a finding, even when the headline result sounds really strong. And unfortunately, this isn't just a theoretical concern. In many real-world cases, as you can see in the graph here, studies have been retracted due to misconduct or major errors, and a really common thread across these cases is the same. It's that data were unreliable, that the results couldn't be verified, or both of those. Realistically, there's a significant overlap between the two, and this really speaks directly to research integrity. So when the data is shared, the scientific community has the opportunity to validate those findings, catch mistakes, challenge results when necessary. Without that transparency, the integrity is compromised. And it's important to note how unreliable data can have actual real-world consequences. So the Surgisphere scandal, that's an example on this screen, didn't just damage the academic credibility of the authors. It actually influenced global health policy during a pandemic. Next slide. So we've just seen how a lack of data transparency can undermine research integrity in serious, even high-profile ways. But integrity isn't just about avoiding misconduct. It's also about ensuring that our everyday research practices are robust, that they're reliable and repeatable. And that sort of brings us around to research quality, and a key part of that being reproducibility. So if your findings can't be produced by yourselves or by others, then their value is somewhat limited, no matter how important your conclusions seem. And as you can see here, there is a widespread challenge across the research community. So I think that access to well-documented data is probably at the heart of fixing this. So even without honest, well-intentioned research, if it can't stand up to scrutiny, we're in trouble. Next slide. So a lack of data isn't just a scientific issue, it's also an economic one. Irreproducible research comes at a significant cost. In the US alone, biology research is estimated to cost $28 billion every year. And in Europe, the lack of fair, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data, costs an estimated 10.2 billion annually. But it's not all negative. Sorry, next. Got a couple of animations, and next again. So when data is well managed and openly shared, it can be instead an economic asset. So one of the clearest examples of this is the Human Genome Project. You're probably familiar, but in case you're not, it was a bold, ambitious project, sort of a moonshot idea at the time. When it was completed in the early 2000s, all of the genomic data was made openly available online, actually before the research paper was published. And that openness had real-world impact. It accelerated the identification of disease-related genes. It enabled the development of new drugs, including treatments for conditions like advanced melanoma, and it also laid the foundations for pharmacogenomics. So the economic return on this has been pretty enormous. According to the Battelle Memorial Institute, the Human Genome Project has generated over $1 trillion in economic impact in the US. And that's just in the US alone. Crucially, the data sharing model wasn't an afterthought. It was built directly into the project, and the Bermuda Principles established during strategy meetings in the 1990s required that all of the human genomic sequence data be released within 24 hours electronically. And these principles they haven't just shaped genomics. They've become a model for rapid data sharing across other fields like proteomics and beyond. And it's also a really powerful example of what can happen when the research community aligns around data sharing and openness. And it also shows the critical role that policy and infrastructure can play in reinforcing those expectations. Next slide. Cheers. So the Human Genome Project showed us what's possible when openness is built into the research from the start, not just scientifically, but we've looked at economically and socially too. So funders have taken note, and increasingly major funders are now mandating open data sharing as standard, as a condition of grant funding. The sort of understanding that public investment in research should lead to public benefit. And that, of course, means making data accessible, reusable, and impactful beyond just that single publication. So what began as good practice in pioneering projects is now becoming a standard policy in many parts of the research landscape. There are some examples on the screen of funders who are requiring full deposition of data, but that's not it's not limited to just these three. But yeah, I guess these mandates are reflecting this growing consensus that open data it's not optional, it's part of what responsible research really looks like in the 21st century. Okay, next slide. Yes, so to reflect those funder policies and to support you as researchers in meeting them, we've introduced a standard data policy across all of our journals. The aim was simple, just to make data sharing clearer, more consistent, and more achievable for yourselves, for readers, for reviewers. Springer Nature was actually one of the first major publishers to implement a data policy framework back in 2016, which was quite complicated, but ahead of itself, I guess. And we are now able to build on that foundation that we created, and we're able to support more robust open research practices. Next slide. So very briefly, just to expand on the policy, it requires that every research article includes a data availability statement. So that's just a brief, clear description of where the data supporting the article can be found. For certain data types where community standards exist, deposition in a recognized repository is mandatory. For all other data, sharing is strongly encouraged wherever possible. Having this single baseline policy helps us better align with funder requirements and provides actually a consistent way to actually assess compliance, and for the funders themselves. More importantly, though, it reinforces trust in the research that we publish by obviously promoting greater transparency around the data. We find that standardization also makes things easier for you yourselves as authors. Hopefully, it improves the submission experience by making those expectations clear and consistent. And for editors, similarly, and our editorial teams, it simplifies our internal processes. It helps to reduce turnaround times with the publication of your papers. Next slide. Unfortunately, simply having a baseline policy or requiring a data availability statement doesn't solve all of our data sharing challenges. If you spent time reading research papers, the chances are you've come across the phrase data available on request, data available on reasonable request, or along those lines. And if we're honest, if you submitted a manuscript recently under a similar policy, you might also have written those exact words yourself. Just in a sense, it's possibly a tick box exercise. But a relatively recent study examined over 1,700 publications found that in fewer than 7% of cases were the data actually shared when requested. Sorry, next animation. So yeah, really, that's not all that surprising if you think about it. I know for myself, if someone asked me, could you locate data from a study that you did 8 years ago? I probably wouldn't be able to tell you where it was. It could have been saved on a USB stick that's long gone, or it could be left behind when you changed institutions. In cases like that, the data are, for all practical purposes, lost. So while available on request might look like compliance in certain cases, in reality, it often means the data are not meaningfully accessible at all. Next slide. So if available on request isn't good enough, what is? It's pretty clear that we need better systems or incentives to support you in sharing your data more openly and reliably. At Springer Nature, our approach on this has been simple. We want to encourage data sharing just by making it easier. So that's why for a number of our Nature partner journals, we've introduced an integration with Figshare, which is a generalist repository. It allows authors to deposit their data directly during the manuscript submission process. So there are no separate steps, no extra platforms. It's supposed to be seamless and efficient, and designed to remove that barrier to actually providing your data, which is convenience, I guess. Next slide. So it is suitable for a wide range of data types and research areas. It's free and simple to use. You basically decide what data and accompanying metadata to add to the repository. At manuscript submission, we also have a dedicated team that performs specialist checks on your submitted data sets. So in this way, you are able to share data privately with reviewers during peer review. Figshare also automatically assigns a DOI, which is a digital object identifier, to your data set, and that ensures that they're citable and trackable. You are then able to include your data set as a reference in your paper. And the data themselves become accessible. They're sort of automatically published alongside publication of your associated manuscript. Next slide. What's also great about the system is the two-way linking between the article and the data set. So in your data availability statement, you can include a direct link to your Figshare record. Next animation. Next one. Next one. Perfect. So in your data availability statement, you can include a direct link to your Figshare record. You can also include a reference, a citation. And then on the other side, the Figshare dataset links back to the peer-reviewed article. So this creates a sort of a very transparent and traceable connection between the data and the findings, making it easier for others to explore, validate, and I guess build on your work. Next slide. So this kind of seamless linking between paper and data is a really great example of what good data sharing can look like. It's transparent, it's accessible, and it's easy to navigate. So yes, making it easy to share data is definitely part of the solution. But sometimes a generous repository like Figshare is not necessarily the right fit for the kind of data that you're working with. Or perhaps the challenge is actually just more basic than that, and you're not sure what data you're expected to share or how to share it. Springer Nature, in partnership with Digital Science, run a longitudinal study of authors called The State of Open Data. And what we've consistently seen is that despite the increasing mandates from funders and institutions, many researchers aren't being given the tools, the time, or the support to meet those new expectations. And, consequently, we're seeing a lot of growing frustration. There's rising requirements and workload, lack of time, tools, and expertise, and frankly, little reward or recognition for actually doing the right thing. So we're effectively asking for a cultural and behavioral shift, but many researchers are being left to navigate it alone, and that's not a sustainable model. So then the question for us as publishers is how do we help? Next slide. So apologies, this is slightly backwards, but if researchers are facing growing demands without the necessary support, what can we do? And I guess the simplest answer is that we can offer clear, practical guidance to you. So that's why one of our key initiatives is focused on helping you understand what's expected, what data to share, where to share it, and how to do it properly. We want to provide the right support because compliance is possible, but we also want to make it manageable. So next slide. Okay, so imagine you're a researcher submitting a manuscript to one of our journals and you encounter our research data policy. Next. There's a few too many animations on this slide. Next. Okay, and next. Okay, so first you realize you need to write a data availability statement, and that means figuring out what data sets you need to share. Next. Next. How to share them and where to share them next. Right. Then comes the documentation, the metadata, maybe even cleaning or processing. Next. 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 Next again. And if you haven't already been managing your data along the way, then this all suddenly becomes a really huge task, right? And it's a huge task at exactly the wrong time. Ideally, all of this would have been planned up front with some sort of data management plan that would have been created alongside your research design. But then at article submission stage, you've now got deadlines, you've got other projects, maybe another grant to finish, and now this feels like a roadblock. even though it's a really valuable activity, once it's framed in the context of submission, it can start to feel an awful lot like a barrier to publication instead of something that actually enhances the research. So where we sit as publishers, we're obviously not embedded in your lab meetings or project planning, but we can still maybe play a role by improving the support and guidance available at each of these individual key points, and hopefully make this process feel a little less like an obstacle. Next slide. Next, you can keep clicking next till we're through. Perfect. So to help address these challenges, we've been developing a new tool, which is designed to take some of that burden off of you during your manuscript submission, sorry. So when you upload your manuscript, the tool automatically will identify the data sets that are mentioned in your paper. It will provide tailored guidance on how to share each of those data sets. And then at the end, it drafts your data availability statement for you. So it's a way of streamlining the process that we just saw, hopefully making compliance easier, faster, and also more accurate. Next slide. So the tool has been built with the expertise of our curation teams. It uses a large language model paired with algorithmic approaches and a supporting schema. Importantly, it's not fully automated, so you retain full control to review, edit, and approve the generated outputs. The tool ensures policy compliance, but the guidance it provides goes further, like a step further than that. So it helps you align with best practices in data sharing, not just simple baseline policy compliance. It is being developed as we speak in an iterative user-informed process and is currently in pilot use across a select number of our journals. Next slide. Okay, so we've talked about tools and support to help you share your data, but what about getting recognized for it? So right now, data sharing is often framed as something researchers have to do rather than something that's valued in its own right. But ultimately, we want to see data treated as a first-class research output, just like a traditional article. We realize that kind of cultural shift takes time. But one important stepping stone is the data paper, which gives you a way to formally publish your data set in a peer-reviewed format, making it citable and discoverable. And it's also easy to integrate into your research narrative. Next slide. So one of the clearest, easiest ways to get recognition is through a data article, sometimes called a data paper. They are peer-reviewed publications that focus specifically on describing usually high-value data sets, how they were created, structured, and how they can be reused. Obviously, it improves findability, transparency, all the good things, but it also gives you credit for the effort and the expertise involved in generating that data, just like a research article does. Data articles can take different forms. So you've got long format data descriptors. They're the papers that you, at Springer Nature, we would direct you to scientific data. And then we've got shorter versions, which is called data notes. And then the data itself is typically hosted in a recognized repository, which is either domain specific or generalist like Figshare. And the article will link directly to it, making reuse and citation easier. But yeah, ultimately, these articles help shift the culture by making that data, the data that you've created, visible and citable, so it's part of the scholarly record. Next. So yes, data descriptors fit into this open science ecosystem where the goal is, I guess, open modular publishing where data, code, and protocols all live alongside each other and are really recognized as scholarly output. It would be remiss of me to present on the topic of research data and not mention the FAIR principles. Whether or not you're submitting a traditional research article or a standalone data paper like these, we always encourage researchers to follow the FAIR principles, which are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. When it comes to data papers specifically, ensuring that the data described are fair isn't just a nice to have in that situation, it is essential. These papers are, of course, about maximizing the reuse, the impact, and the credit. And none of that works if the data aren't accessible or understandable to others. So FAIR, it stands for findable. So others should be able to easily locate the data. We usually use persistent identifiers, so DOIs, as I mentioned earlier, or accession IDs. It needs to be accessible, obviously. Data should be retrievable by humans. If it's machine readable, then great. Using standard protocols, even if access is somehow restricted, needs to be interoperable. So using standard formats, vocabulary, so that ultimately maybe another research team can integrate it with another data set. And then reusable, the better description, the more description, the better. Clear usage licenses, documentation, so it can be understood and reused confidently. So FAIR, following the FAIR principles ensures that your data set isn't just archived, it's usable and it supports the full value of the data that you've produced. Next. Okay, so we've talked about how data sharing can obviously be tricky, especially with different requirements, depending on your field or the funder. And that's why we've also developed a few practical support tools, like the ones that we've got here. So we've got the Research Data Help Desk, and that's our main support channel. So you can reach out directly to the team with questions. We're very happy to help with things like writing the DAS, choosing a repository, interpreting policy requirements, any general queries about sensitive data, that's absolutely fine. We also have a research data community, which provides more, I guess, informal guidance. Also blog posts with tips and best practices. They're all written with input from our team and also from the wider research community. So please do go and join. Do go and join that if you are interested in data sharing. The goal is simple, just make it easier for researchers to meet requirements without needing to navigate all of this ecosystem on their own. Next slide. So yep, as we've seen, research data it's not just a byproduct of your work. It's really a core part of the research itself. I hope that I've been able to impress that upon you. Thank you very much for being here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Super. Thank you, Hannah, for that excellent presentation. As Hannah said, now's the time for questions. So please do type them into the Q&A if you've got any. We've already had some that have come in. So to start with one from Franz, he's asked, do you consider algorithms as research data? As I don't find journals stating how algorithms are to be treated. So if I made my algorithm available, am I not missing an opportunity to commercialize my ideas?
Yes, I would describe algorithms as research data. There is a slightly separate code policy now, which effectively works in the same way as the data availability statement. So I think that they are two separate policies, but it's effectively the same. Any code that you write, any algorithms that you have should be declared in the paper. If there's a reason that you can't share the code, the algorithm, maybe it's third party, then you can include a justification for why you're not sharing it in the code statement.
Super, thank you, Hannah. A question from Ricardo as well. He's asked, what is the most effective way to publish my research data? Is it to use tools like Zenodo or as supplementary material?
That's a really good question. I would, so supplementary materials, when they're submitted with a paper, I would describe them as research data. They themselves support the conclusion of your work in the interest of being findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. They would be much better placed in a repository than if they are simply attached to a paper. So I would recommend something like Zenodo instead. The problem with supplementary materials is that most journals, they're only available online. They won't be in the downloadable PDF, so they're not very findable. It's sort of a messy solution. So yeah, where possible, put them in a repository. They can give you a persistent identifier. When somebody else uses your data, they can cite your work. Yeah.
Super, thanks, Hannah. We've had a question from Gary as well, who said, I think you stated that sorry, let me start again. I think you stated that you mentioned the deposition of mandated data types. Did you mention what the mandated data types actually were? I think I missed it.
No, I did not. It generally lies in the genomic sciences. They are available on our webpage. I can provide that for you guys. It might be on this slide actually. But yeah, you can find out. They will also tell you on the policy pages of the journal that you're submitting to, but it's usually genomics. There's a little bit of crystallography data that needs to be deposited in a specific place. But they're all they're community mandated. So usually if you're working within a specific community, these are things that are likely to be known to you. But yeah, they're all available on our policy pages.
Thanks, Hannah. Had a comment from Alekos as well, who said, regarding making available the original data set, my proposal is to have it as a supplementary material file and also the accompanying quality control data.
So similarly to the previous question, having it as supplementary material is fine, but it's not super fair. You could still describe it as supplementary information. I would still recommend that you put that both data files into a repository. You can still reference it in the same way from your manuscript, file X at, and then the citation to your the repository itself. Again, this will help you get citations for your work. You can get a DOI, a persistent identifier to it. And it's more discoverable that way than just having it effectively buried inside a research article.
Thank you, Hannah. A question from Suleiman, who said, could you elaborate on why researchers are not used to providing data when actually requested to do so?
I think it's partly because compliance has been very difficult to actually record. I think generally we know that it's important for data to be shared, but up until this point, funders have not really been checking to see if the data is available. What else? It's also been difficult to do, frankly. Like I said, researchers aren't provided with haven't been provided with a lot of extra resources to figure out how to suddenly become data experts and manage their data that way.
Super, thanks, Hannah. A question from Mohammed. He said, as a researcher, am I allowed to use the published data for further study? If so, whom should I contact for permission? And is it possible to obtain the data from them?
Yes, generally speaking, it is possible. There might be situations where it's third-party data or they're sensitive data, which makes it harder to get a hold of that specific data. If it's in a repository, it's likely you'll just be able to download it and use it. There should be a data license associated with the record in the repository that helps you know how you can use it, so what you're allowed to do with it. What else have I missed? If you have the situation that we discussed where it says data available upon request, so those authors have they have effectively promised that they will make it available to you. So I would start by, if that's the case, I would start by contacting the corresponding author directly. If you're not getting a response, contact the editorial team of the journal in which they published, and they should be able to help you out.
Super, thank you, Hannah. A question from Hans as well. He's asked, does it matter which data service provider I use for data sharing?
Generally speaking, no. What we want to see is a repository that has persistence, so we know that they're going to be around for a little while ahead. They have funding to stay alive basically and host your data, and we want someone that prints DOIs or accession IDs, some sort of persistent identifier. But which repository you use, which data service you use, unless it is a mandate of a mandated data type, so for example, genomic data should go into usually an INSDC repository. Otherwise, whatever fits your data type really is okay.
Super, thank you, Hannah. A simple question for you as well. Someone's asked, what does DAS mean?
DAS, sorry, that's the data availability statement. So that's just a brief description of the data that are underlying that specific research article. So it could be anything that you've generated yourself during the research, or it could be the data that you've actually used. So somebody else's data that you've used and you've analyzed.
Super, thanks, Hannah. Another question that's come in here. What about making your code public? Does Figshare also facilitate this process?
You can do. Like I said, there's a code policy, which is very similar to the data policy. So make it open if you can, share what you can. And I think you can share it on Figshare on a generous repository. There are better places to do it, to be honest. Probably GitHub is a better bet. They will actually mint DOIs for you as well. So you can get, again, a persistent identifier, include that in your manuscript.
Thanks, Hannah. Another question that's come in here. If the article is not published under open access policy, and if another researcher or scientist asks the author for the full text of the article, say via ResearchGate, what is the correct ethical way the author should act in such a request?
I would, if you're happy to share it, I think if in this case we're talking directly about the manuscript as opposed to the data. Otherwise, I'd contact the journal support team in which you published if you've got any questions about that. If it's the data itself, hopefully that's already openly available, so that won't be behind a paywall. That will be at hopefully a repository or a lab website or something like that, so they won't have difficulty accessing that.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Question here as well. Sorry if I missed this. Is the data paper thought to be bound to a single research, or is it more of a statement about general data management that can be applied generically?
Data papers are usually a single specific piece of research that you've done. Maybe there are not huge conclusions that you want to draw from it, but it might be useful to other researchers down the line. So maybe for different meta-analyses. Obviously, if you've got lots of sort of related work that can be grouped together, provided there's enough metadata and description of that data, then I think that can be included in probably one of the longer form data papers. So that would be a scientific data probably.
Super, thank you, Hannah. A question here from Louis as well, who's asked, could interviews be research data? And how about surveys?
Yeah, both of those.
Super. Also a question on interview data. He's asked, in cases where interview data is in a different language and has been translated into English, do we need to share both or only the translated one?
I would say, if you're submitting to one of our English language journals, then bare minimum you would want to share the English version. Whether or not you choose to share the untranslated version, I would say is probably up to you. Maybe discuss with the editor and see what they think. I would also say when it comes to interview transcripts, you have to be a little bit careful because we don't want to share ultimately super sensitive data. So there might be a little bit of anonymization that you also need to do. But I mean, yeah, the bare minimum you'd want the English translation for an English journal.
Thanks, Hannah. A question here from Tran as well, who's asked, how can you improve the FAIR principle on the research?
Fair. So like I said, number one would be sharing your data via a repository. Getting that persistent identifier, the DOI, that you can then share in your own paper and you can get citations from it. What we've also found is that sharing your data through a repository actually gets you as an author more citations for the actual research article that you've published as well. So yeah, number one, sharing via a repository. I would also say, sorry, as much description as you can, metadata, really ensuring that you've got as much metadata as you can in the repository, so it's clear when others come to use it, how it might fit into their own data sets if they wanted to do some sort of analysis or
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Another question here, is it possible to publish a paper without sharing the data since it is related to the privacy of the stakeholders?
Yes. There are exceptions to the data policy, and they typically include ethical, legal, or commercial restraints. So what I'd suggest is that you clearly justify and document all of those exceptions in the data availability statement, particularly in cases where data includes sensitive information. It is often possible to share sensitive data after anonymization or through a controlled access repository, but this does rely on the ethical approval that you've obtained and the participant consent. But yeah, rule of thumb is open as possible, but as closed as necessary. So if it's necessary not to share the data for a sensitive reason, then that's okay. Just document it in your paper in the data availability statement.
Thank you, Hannah. Another question here. I'm a PhD student in the humanities where research data often takes the form of field notes, sketches, or narrative records. How does data sharing work in such cases? And are there any recommended best practices for handling this type of material?
Yeah, it's hard when you've got a lot of different material. I would suggest having some sort of data management plan. I would discuss with your institution if they have a way, if they have guidelines for how you're supposed to collect this data. Yeah, it's difficult from a publisher because we see you right at the end. So of those data that you've collected, what is actually required, what underlies your actual research paper, that's going to be probably quite a lot larger than what you actually end up sharing potentially. So yeah, having a data management plan before you even start is the number one way of stopping any problems and knowing how to collect your data, how to record it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hannah. Question from Demetrius, who said, thank you for the very interesting presentation. Would it be acceptable by Springer Nature if data is already published as data or article with another publisher?
Oh, sorry, can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, would it be acceptable by Springer Nature as a valid DAS, that is, if the data is already published as a data or article with another publisher?
Yes, absolutely. So if it's data that you've used in an analysis, it's not data that you've generated, but it's something that you've used from elsewhere, then yes, please document that in the data availability statement. What else? Yep, you can say where it's from, so you can cite the piece of research that you found it in. So if they've put it in a repository, you can also cite the repository that they've used, the actual record, the data record from the repository. Again, if there are problems about sharing it, so maybe the other thing we might see is that you've actually been able to get data from somebody else, but they have not shared it more openly than that. Just provide information on how you got the data. So it might be that you were able to contact the lead researcher on this, and you might be able to give them that, you might be able to provide the email or the institution from where you got the data. I think as a guiding framework, you want to think about where the data is from, what the data is, and how somebody else might be able to access that data. So you might not have the data to yourself, but if you can provide those pieces of information, then somebody else might also be able to go and obtain it for themselves.
Great, thanks, Hannah. A question from Aaron. He's asked, for data that we have paid a subscription for, we have a contract with the data provider not to republish. Is it acceptable to point to the data provider for researchers to pay a subscription and to try to reproduce our results?
Yes, if that's how you've got hold of the data and that's how the owner of the data are running the repository, then there's not much you can do about that. Document it in the DAS again. Yeah, that's all I'd say.
Great, thank you, Hannah. A question from Michael. Can your research be based on simulated data only? When is it acceptable and not acceptable?
It's probably a question that I'm not really able to answer. It depends on the field, depends on the question that you're answering. There are lots of simulated data sets around. So if that's what you're describing in your research article and you can provide that, then, put it in a repository and cite it from the paper. And yeah, you'll have to speak to the editorial policies of the specific journal that you're submitting to.
Thanks, Hannah. Question from Muad, who said, thanks again for the presentation. In the field of microbiology, when you publish a paper about the effect of bacteria or fungi on plant growth, for example, it's impossible to reproduce results in this case because you do not have the strains used in the study. How could we deal with that? How could we be credible?
Again, I suppose this is very specific to microbiology. If you can provide information on the strains that you used, I think the community is going to understand that certain things maybe aren't reproducible for X reason. As long as it's documented in the paper, the community is able to validate it from the perspective of the community. So that's what I suggest.
Super, thank you. Question from Enya as well, who said, you said that studies under funding should provide research data as complete as possible. Are there official regulations concerning that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question for me?
Sure. You said that studies under funding should provide research data as complete as possible. Are there official regulations concerning that?
I'm not sure about what you mean by official regulations, but provide, alongside your research article, you need to provide whatever data supports the conclusions of your research article. So, it's kind of up to you what you're sharing, but if a peer review is going to look at that and can see that you haven't shared everything, then you're going to have to think about what is missing from your data record. I'm not sure what we mean by regulations in this case. I'm sorry.
Sure. Thanks, Hannah. Someone's asked as well, what kind of data set is mostly preferable?
Good question. I don't think there's a most preferable type of data set. It's the whatever data supports the conclusions of your article. So if that is an analysis, a lab analysis, or an interview transcript, you need to also have a look at which repository maybe is the most appropriate for that data type. Perhaps your community has recommendations for where you're supposed to put specific data types, a bit like mandated data, but sometimes those repositories are not, you don't need to use them, but they have the ability to record the right metadata for that specific data type. So have a look. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. A question from Negus as well, who's asked, raw genetic data set mostly needs participant consent not to be shared easily by the author. Is summary statistics good enough as data availability?
It does depend. And there's an element of editorial discretion when it comes to these things. There are certain repositories like I forget the name now, but they are specific for sensitive human data. If you can't share it, if there's no consent, then you again explain that in the data availability statement, and the editorial team can make a judgment on whether or not they think that they have enough information for your paper to be validated and published.
Thank you, Hannah. Another question here, do my graphs and models count as research data, or would it be better to just list the readings I took?
sort of depends on the field and what you're showing. We tried to stay away from the term raw data because that seems to have different meanings in different fields. If you're specifically drawing on those graphs for conclusions in your paper, it might be worth actually including them directly in the paper as figures. But if they're too big for that, but you're still discussing them in the paper, I would definitely include them as the underlying research data. If you're able to include the sort of minimal level measurements as well, that's even better. So you have both.
Great, thank you, Hannah. A question from Pia Paolo, who's asked, how can we overcome the limitations imposed by the data protection officer, who in some cases requests that data not be disseminated, even within the working group, in order to avoid any possibility of re-identification?
I don't think that there's a way to work around that. You, if it's a problem in terms of the working group, I think you would need to discuss that further with the officer. But in terms of sharing it as alongside a research article, if you don't have consent to share for whatever reason, you don't have the ethical legal, if you've got ethical or legal constraints, then you shouldn't be sharing that data. And it's not going to stop you from being published either. Again, just describe it in the data availability statement.
Great, thanks, Hannah. A second question actually from Pier Paolo as well. He's asked, are there specific guidelines for data related to systematic reviews, or is it sufficient to publish all summary tables with the data extracted from the included studies, possibly as supplementary material?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. Again, when it comes to supplementary information, I would avoid attaching it directly to a manuscript, and I would include it as research data at a repository. Sharing it outside of the research article itself makes it more findable, more accessible, more reusable. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Hannah. We are pretty much at time, but we do still have some open questions. Do you have another 5-10 minutes, Hannah, just to try and get through some of these, or?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. A question from Alexander. He's asked, what if the raw data are available, but the bioinformatic pipeline to yield the results is not? If authors are not responsive, is there a way to enforce access to it via the editor?
Yes, well, if it's ultimately still accessible, yes. I would contact the editorial team and they will be able to get in contact with, well, they will do their very best to get in contact with the authors. If they have in their paper promised that this is available on request and they aren't providing it to you, there may be options to maybe not a retraction, but there are sort of ways to go about these things of getting the data. So yeah, go through the editorial team and they should be able to help you.
Great, thanks, Hannah. A question from Manuel as well, who's asked, how should we deal with qualitative data? We often commit to delete data after a certain period of time. That prevents publishing it in a repository.
Yes, okay. Again, it depends. Is it whether or not it supports the underlying conclusions of your research work? I'm not sure exactly what we're talking about when we're saying qualitative data. But yeah, if it supports the conclusions of your research article, it's a really good idea to be able to share it if there's a way of storing it. Making a decision later about deleting it, then it's great. Otherwise, yeah, I would. Yeah, the general point being, if it supports the conclusions of your article, you should be holding on to it and sharing that.
Great, thanks, Hannah. Question here, sometimes some journals may request for preprints. How can we make sure the privacy of our data because the paper is not still published?
Yeah, so Yeah, I know speaking to researchers, there's often a bit of a worry about being scooped, but a lot of repositories will provide embargoed release. So in combination with peer review access, you can sort of balance the openness of the data, but also protecting the data. It's not actually published yet. I would also say that ultimately the benefits of actually data sharing generally outweigh the risks. But yeah, embargoes exist. You can make your data available at publication, so in coordination with the publication itself. So there's no worry about somebody else using it before you've had time to get your name against it.
Thanks, Anna. Question here from Tina as well, who said, again, thank you for the presentation. She's asked, just to clarify, what is meant with other data when Springer encourages to share the other data? Is it supplementary material?
So I think in that specific case, it was data that weren't mandated. So if you have a specific mandated type of data, so usually genomic data, that needs to go, that definitely needs to be deposited, and it needs to be deposited in a very specific repository. Other data being everything else that's not mandated. So any data that, again, underlies the conclusion of your work, but isn't mandated data.
Great, thank you. Question from Laura. How can we reuse raw data available from other authors? Who will be the authors?
So you're the author of the work that you conduct. If you're publishing a paper and you've used somebody else's data, like a secondary source of data, to analyze and make your own conclusions, then in the data availability statement for your paper, please cite the data that you've used. That's why it's easier if you've got this from a repository, then you've got a DOI, you can easily cite it, you can put it in the references. Here's the data set, the exact data set that I used. Here's the DOI, here's the persistent identifier. Describe it in the DAS. You're the author of the paper that you publish.
Great, thank you. Another question from Tina, who said, why has Springer decided to update its policy now? What is the open science context and development you follow? Do you follow what is going on in academia in general, or is this a response to what other publishers are doing?
We are, well, when it comes to data policy, it's largely what we're following, what is happening via the funders, institutions, so more what is happening within academia. Like I said, we were actually the first to have a data policy foundation, so it was a bit confusing. There were 4 different levels. It was basically encouraging authors to share data where previously they weren't. So yeah, we're now moving beyond that. So we've got this baseline data policy, which encourages everybody to share as much as they possibly can.
Thank you, Hannah. Another question here from Nate, who said, will articles say if they are fair?
No, sadly. You sort of have to make a judgment yourself, reading the data availability statement and looking at the data records themselves. There is a lot of discussion about sort of making certificates for fair, or like ranking data sets potentially, but there's nothing at the moment.
Thanks, Hannah. Someone else here has said, apologies, they missed the beginning part of the presentation, so maybe we've already shared this, but are there different types of data repositories? Are some more fit for certain purposes or fields than others?
Yes, absolutely. There are a few resources out there, fair sharing, FAIR, capital letters, fair sharing, and Re3 data. So if you've got a specific data type that you want to share, you go to either of those websites, they'll be able to help you find an appropriate repository. It's largely down to which community, which data repository, which community is using. Does it record the right set of metadata? Does it know how to handle the file format that you're using for whatever data you're collecting? But yeah, there are lots of different repositories. Figshare was an example that we use. It's a generalist repository, so it'll take pretty much anything, but it's not ideal at all for every single type of data. So yeah, definitely recommend doing a little research there.
Thanks, Hannah. A question from Tim as well. Does a longer mathematical proof, including extended remarks, also count as research data? Is a supplementary document the correct place to put it?
Again, my personal preference is to put supplementary material outside of the paper into a repository. But if you are unsure, I would ask the editorial team where they think that is the most appropriate place. Again, if the only thing that's really is definitively not research data is the article itself. So everything else, if you can share it in a repository, I think it's better, it's fairer. But yeah, speak to the editorial team if you have if you are unsure.
Great, thanks, Hannah. A question here from Anna, who's asked, is the Springer's article and data set linking only with Figshare? How about other repositories such as Zenodo, OSF, etc.? So
within our systems, we only have the Figshare integration. That absolutely does not stop you from using any of the other generalist repositories, any other specific community mandated repositories. It's totally up to you. We don't get anything from it. It's just a service that we're providing to help remove that barrier from data sharing and make it easier for you guys. But yeah, use whichever repository you like. Often institutions will have links to specific repositories, so definitely explore whether or not you can your institution has a space for you to upload your data there.
Thank you, Hannah. Last couple of questions. We've got one from Chayata, who said, are there any common challenges that foreign scientists face when it comes to publishing? For example, different regulations in their countries, etc.
Yes. I suppose it somewhat comes down to the approval that you can get, where you can where and whether you can share the data that you've collected. That's really going to be down to your ethical body. Sometimes there's a struggle with funding for repository deposition. So some repositories, depends on how much data you've got, right? Some repositories will charge you over X number of megabytes or whatever, gigabytes. So the Figshare integration that we have, they provide a free space for you there. They do also provide multiple other generous repositories also provide free data sharing spaces, but it is limited to the amount of data that you potentially have. So there's a bit of work to figure that one out. We've got information on our policy pages relating to, I guess, some guidance on repositories that you could use. But again, also Re3 data, fair sharing, they're the best places to go for that.
Great, thank you, Hannah. We are 10 minutes over, so I think we'll make this the last question. There is a small number of other questions as well that we haven't had time to get to, but I think maybe we'll handle those offline and come back to people separately. So the final one here is, as a researcher, which privacy policy should I keep an eye on or maybe expect from the journal to guarantee? For example, statements about clouds being used or security protocols for transmissions, etc., to make sure the data is protected. Are there standards or maybe gold standards?
I don't know. I would yeah, specific to those data types. If you've got a privacy policy that you have to follow, then you have to follow that. It doesn't really matter what the journal requires of you. So if you're able to provide that data, great. If you're not, please detail that in the data availability statement. We're not trying to stop you from being able to publish your papers. So talk to the editorial team if you have concerns.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, I think that's the end of the questions for today then. But just before we wrap up, just a couple of last housekeeping points. I'm just going to paste, I mentioned earlier that this is one of a series of webinars we're running. So I'm just going to paste into the chat a link to the session that will be taking place next week. That's dealing with how journals operate. So if you haven't signed up for that session already, then please just click on that link. You can register your details, and then you'll be sent all the information on how to log in on the day. So yeah, so that's the session that's taking place next week. One final housekeeping point. Once the session ends today, you'll be automatically redirected to a very short survey about the session. So if you could take the time to fill that in, we'd really appreciate it. It shouldn't take more than 30 seconds. It just helps us to know what you thought of the session, things we could change, or other topics that you might like to see us talk about in future. It just really helps us to improve these going forward. But with that, I think it's just about time to wrap up. So firstly, I'd like to just say a very big thank you to Hannah for your time today, for your really excellent presentation, and for taking the time to answer all the questions. We've answered over 40 questions today, so that's really quite an effort. So thank you very much for that, Hannah. And thank you to everyone that's tuned in today. We hope it's been interesting and insightful for you. And we look forward to seeing you on more of these sessions in future. So Hannah, I don't know if there's any closing remarks you'd like to make as well.
Not really, just thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Hope you've learned something. And thank you, Steve.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Hannah. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you on more of these sessions in future. So thank you very much.